Today, you will change the world. Today, you will change the world. This mantra kept Eli's feet moving through the jungle underbrush. Far beyond heavy panting and snapping of plants underfoot, Eli could make out the rapid cracks of automatic gunfire. The spool of wire he carried became lighter with each step. Today, you will change the world. Eli stopped in a clearing and threw aside a pile of ferns, revealing the trigger plate below. Kneeling, he drew his snips from his leg drop pouch and completed this segment of command line, attaching it to the trigger plate. This respite was welcomed by his legs and lungs both. This was his 20th connection this run. One more connection, and one more connection, and today, you will change the world. It didn't even feel that long ago when Eli had first heard the mantra. At first it had to him seemed so generic, so cliché. He had chuckled out loud at what seemed at the time the ridiculousness of it. It wasn't a revolutionary call to arms. It was something that belonged in a boorish self-help seminar. He had no idea the impact it would have, not just on himself, but on the hundreds of others he would come to know. The snaps of gunfire sounded closer. The shots were not aimed for Eli, but that didn't seem to lessen his fear or sense of urgency. He may not be the target, but he felt as though it was likely he knew who was. Everybody had a role to fill. Everybody had their purpose. His legs pleaded for him to stay in the clearing, to go no further, and a voice inside himself was echoing these pleas. Today, you will change the world. He would not allow himself to falter. There was no time to rest, no time to recover. Eli had but one more segment. Taking up his tools and spool, he dashed off in the direction of his final trigger. As he ran, the cracks grew closer. He thought the jungle was playing tricks on him, because the gunfire now sounded to be in the direction he was running. Today, you will change the world. It was no trick, he realized, a realization that had caused him to slow his gait. As the snaps grew louder, added to it was a whistle Eli was not familiar with. As the debris from the trees above began to fall onto him and into his vision, he soon understood these whistles. He was close enough now that the forest was no longer cover. Today, you will change the world. Eli crouched slightly as he quickened his pace, much to the chagrin of his legs. The spool was nearly empty now. The final clearing was next to a shimmering pool of spring water that gently streamed over moss-covered stones to subsequent pools and streams below. The sight reminded Eli of the fountain in the park where he had first attended the Forsaken rally. That was back in the beginning, he thought, back before the anger. The rally was formed in response to the colony ships. The colony ships were humanity's last hope, as was famously touted by politicians planet-wide. It was no secret, and there was no debate, that mankind had battered and abused Earth to its near limit. The people were told their only chance was to construct enormous colony ships capable of multi-generational prolonged space travel to far-off solar systems. That these behemoth ships would carry humans to potentially habitable planets and thus allow the continuation of the species. Mental pictures were painted of worlds with abundance and freshness, places where your children's children could flourish and live in ways that were unimaginable to the majority of the people. With the diminishment of planetary resources, the wealth on Earth had become so greatly consolidated among the ruling aristocracies that the middle class was eliminated, leaving billions in poverty and at the mercy of these wealthy elite. With such conditions, the appeal of abundance drew the masses in. Jobs were abandoned or restructured to benefit the construction of the savior colony ships, and those who were already struggling to survive worked on with less to ensure the timely completion of these vessels. The completion of the colony ships was an awe-inspiring spectacle, a spectacle that showed that a collective mankind can accomplish any feat, even a feat that would leave their homeworld a broken husk of the society it had once been. Entire cities had been consumed in the quest for materials. The landscape was unrecognizable to all those of the time. However, even through all the objections and obstacles, the colony ships were completed. As massive as the colony ships were, there wasn't room for everyone. Many would be left behind on Earth to suffer whatever catastrophic environmental disaster would happen first. So came a selection process, another highly politicized procedure that proclaimed fairness above all. However, as with many political undertakings, The promise and the execution were very contradictory. Those that were left behind were the insolvent and the suffering. Small sections of government officials with designs for greater power, left from the vacuum of the departing elite, had also decided to remain. Anyone who didn't demonstrate having a directly exploitable skill or wasn't a member of the wealthy classes were forsaken. Ely and many others had decided to not let their fate reside with the remaining nobility. That what remained of the earth would belong to the masses, not the masters. And once the massive colony ships departed Earth, a people's revolution would begin. Today, you will change the world. Sweat, adrenaline, and elation at the near-ended run caused Eli's hands to tremble as he connected the final trigger. When he had finished, he felt a wash of hollow accomplishment flow through him and steady his hands. He had completed his purpose. He hadn't been wanted for a colony ship, but the Forsaken had needed him. He was totally consumed by this feeling of quasi-purpose that he ignored the gunfire that was tearing through the trees. He stood and backed away from the trigger plate as if his proximity to it might cause his task to be undone. Brought to the ground and back to reality by the round ripping through his shoulder, Eli suddenly realized he wasn't complete without radioing in his completion. Rolling onto his good shoulder, he pulled his radio from the leg drop. The gunfire was now very present in his mind, as were the shouts and screams of the nearby battle. The blood on his hands made the button on the radio difficult to press. Section 76 completed, he shouted into the transmitter. Roger, 76 completed, a staticky voice echoed back. Today, you will change the world. Eli rolled onto his back and tried to apply pressure to his wounded shoulder, but the blood pulsing caused his hands to slip. His hand grew weaker every attempt to stem the flow of blood. Exhausted, Eli conceded the effort and resigned himself to his fate. Today I changed the world, he said aloud to himself and to no one. Today I changed.